We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I see 7.
Okay,
And Stephen First is here, so he'll not be, if we're missing someone, he won't be sitting as an alternate.
I lost the audio.
You're ready to begin your recording. Go ahead, Carol. You're all set.
Okay, you want to do roll call?
Mayor Jacobs,
I'm here.
Committeeman Hickey,
Here.
Mr. Travellini.
Rich called it, he will be late. He'll be a few minutes late.
Mr. Walter,
Here.
Mr. Rodelius,
Present.
Mr. Leonard,
Here.
Mr. DiGiovanni. Ms. Orabona. Here. Mr. First,
Here.
Chairwoman Gutschall.
Here. The open public statement.
Adequate notice of this meeting of the Bedminster Township Land Use Board was filed with the Township Clerk, sent to the Bernardsville News and the Courier News, and to all subscribers, and posted at the Township Municipal Building, 1 Miller Lane, Bedminster, New Jersey, on June 10th, 2021.
Okay. Flag salute. I pledge allegiance
To the flag.
flag
United States.
United States of America.
America,
To the republic.
republic for which it stands,
One
one
nation.
nation, under God, indivisible,
With
with liberty and
and justice
justice for all.
for all. You gotta follow Larry. He's directing.
Okay. Do we have anyone from the public on tonight, other than our guests?
We should just declare that we're opening it, Carol.
Yep, okay. We will open it up to the public. Just wanted to see if there's anybody there.
If you are there, you
Sarah?
need to
Sarah?
raise your hand. You need to raise your hand on the Zoom platform or hit us, I think, *9 or something like that.
Correct. All right, so if this is Larry, so if any members of the public wish to make a comment, if you're participating by Zoom, take your cursor, scroll down to the bottom of the page, go over participants. You'll see his icon for raise hand. Click on raise hand. You'll be put into the queue for public comment. If you are participating on tonight's call by phone, *9 will also put you into the queue for public comment.
If anyone has anything that they'd like to talk about that's not on the agenda, now's the time to speak. I guess we are,
There are no hands raised, Carol.
no hands raised. Okay, all right, then we'll close it to the public. So now we want to speak about talk about the ordinance. Larry, do you want to say anything first about it, or?
So this is an ordinance that was introduced by the Township Committee at our last Township Committee meeting. This ordinance would update the zoning map for Bedminster. And I believe that Paul and Frank worked together to update the zoning map to make it consistent with our current plan. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tom and Frank for further discussion.
Sure.
Okay.
So what you're doing tonight, like you did recently for the cannabis ordinance, is you're reviewing this ordinance, which is both an ordinance and a map. And that is one of the major maps of a zoning ordinance, is the zone map. And that is the zoning districts of the entirety of Bedminster Township. That has existed for decades. It is updated regularly when amendments take place to the zone district map. And for example, if you remember back on the KRE property, Bed 1, that when you change that zone, or when you amended the master plan, which the planning board is the party that amends the master plan, you recommended that the governing body change the zoning district to an ORVMU, Office Research Village Mixed Use District. For the first time, that was a new district, and you recommended that you change the master plan to the future land use element to put that land in that proposed future land use area of the future land use map, which is not the same thing as a zoning map. And you recommended that, and then you draft ordinance to the governing body. The governing body then adopted that ordinance and attached to it a map that Paul prepared, changing that land to that district. But it did not yet update the full township-wide zone map, and we said we would later. It is now later. The committee has received that updated zone map. Only the township committee, only the township governing body of any town in New Jersey adopts the zoning map. They adopt it by ordinance. It is required in order to have zoning. It's what creates the differences between one area and another area. The best way to zone is for zoning to be 100% consistent with the master plan. Attorneys love that defense. Plaintiffs hate that consistency. This will achieve that consistency, but you already did that. Technically, the committee already did that by changing the ORVMU zone map of that property only in that time frame of that ordinance. And there was a map attached to that ordinance. But this now updates the full zone map. And perhaps there are other things that Frank can tell us about that maybe clean something up. And if there is some inconsistency, Frank can tell us. I'm not personally directly aware of any inconsistencies. So if you were to get through this and you make a motion, the motion would be to probably to find it consistent with the master plan, but we'll defer to Frank and hear his opinion. Okay, Frank.
Frank, was there anything that you needed to change or update other than the KRE? You're muted, Frank.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
No, I do think that Tom summarized it very well. And at this point, it's one of those rare times where you can say, not just that it's not inconsistent, but the zoning map has been revised to be entirely consistent with the land use plan map. So you certainly could say it's not inconsistent, but it's entirely consistent as well, so that the master plan and the zoning ordinance are in sync, just like Tom said, every town would like to have them. So your job tonight is very simple. You're going to find that there is no inconsistency between the master plan and the zoning map ordinance, and recommend its adoption to the governing body.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well,
Madam Chairman, we should open to the public just
yes, yeah.
after board discussion.
Yes, okay. Frank, again, was there any major changes or any changes that you needed to make other than the KRE rezoning?
No, at this point, Carol, what we tried to do is make sure we've tracked all the zoning changes that ever happened, but every one of them, like the the VN3 zone up in Pottersville, they happened a long period of time, but they were done in the master plan and then added to the zoning map. So the only new change, as you just asked me, would be for the KRE site. Thank you.
Good, okay, thank you. Does the board have any questions regarding the zoning or the zoning map? Everyone understands what we're asking? Okay, we will open it up to the public. If there's anyone that has any questions about the zoning map
Or comments.
or comments, yes. Do we see anyone?
No.
No? Okay, then I guess we can close it to the public. And I think, Frank, then we need a motion to approve this.
Yes, the motion, Madam Chairman, if someone would make it, is a motion to find the proposed ordinance that's been introduced by the governing body as consistent with the master plan.
Motion to approve. Lou?
You need a second?
I'll second it.
Who was that? I didn't hear.
It's either myself or Anna, whoever got there first.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Anna, you can do it.
Okay. Okay, now we need a roll call on that, Tom, I'm assuming?
Yeah, it's a roll call, and
Yep.
Sarah, after this vote, Sarah will send a memo to the council or committee confirming that the board so found.
Okay. Roll call, Sarah, please.
Mayor Jacobs,
Aye.
Committeeman Hickey,
Aye.
Mr. Travellini, Mr.
Aye.
Walter,
What was the next name after that?
Mr. Walter,
Aye.
Mr. Rodelius,
Aye.
Mr. Leonard,
Aye.
Mr. Di Giovanni, Ms. Orabona,
Aye.
Mr. First,
Aye.
Chairwoman Gutschall.
Aye. Motion is approved.
Okay, so the public hearing on this ordinance will be July 19th for anyone who is interested.
Thank you. Okay. We can move on now to Walter Lane with our presentation for AT&T. Welcome, Walter.
Good evening. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So I'm going to be short, but this is a follow-up to our last presentation. Kate, I would like to be able to share her screen for the presentation
Yep.
tonight.
Let me pull this up.
Sure. As Kate's doing now, I'm just going to talk about what's on the first slide, which is we just wanted to review with the board that all the input that we received at the last meeting is correctly reflected as we move forward. So we're going to talk about the guiding principles, the existing conditions, site plan strategies, adaptability for the recommended potential zoning changes. And after that, we'll talk about next steps of how the township would like to proceed. So with that, I will turn it over to Kate, Kate Keller from our consultant team that will take us through the discussion tonight. So Kate, it's all yours.
Okay, thanks. Hold on, I'm trying to get this on full screen, which I'm totally blanking on how to do that right now. Page display, Zoom, full screen mode. Okay. Hi, everybody. It's good to be back again. Thank you all for your time once again. As you are aware by now, my name is Kate Keller. I'm an associate principal with the firm Phillips Price Greigel Laney Hughes. And in this capacity, we're working as part of a team with the County of Somerset, the Township, and Michael Baker Associates. Pete Creamer is also here, who will be discussing a little more later. So tonight, as Walter mentioned, we're going to just kind of follow up on our meeting from a couple weeks ago, in which case we have set a brief agenda for tonight. We're going to go through some of the guiding principles we put together, a lot of which was based on your feedback from the last meeting, as well as just kind of run through some of our preliminary findings. This is really the last step in putting this out for public and for the board's review before we really create, the report that's going to be the core meat of this project. So that's really, what we're going to focus on is just, the existing conditions for your reference, looking at some of the site plan strategies we're hoping to encourage with this report. And then I think this is something that is pretty important is the type of zoning adaptability that we're going to be looking to put into, that we're going to be recommending that goes into place here. So let me just very briefly, we really started this tonight, when we put together at this phase of the project, we wanted to look at the township's vision for both the site and how the township sees its own land use. And the last meeting we had with you a few weeks ago was extremely helpful for that. And the recommendations we made, we think, we base them on market realities. That has to do with just our professional expertise, especially in Walter's capacity and what he sees as the county's planning director, and as well as the stakeholder meetings we had with professionals in varied fields in the area, and of course our conversations with both MetLife and AT&T. And I think what you'll see here, and this goes back to the township's vision for the site, is that we're looking for a high value, high employment, really making this site to continue to be a centerpiece of Bedminster Township. And one of the ways that we look for that, the ways we're looking for that is to encourage flexible zoning that will allow for emerging markets, which we'll talk about a little more, And of course, to maintain opportunity there for AT&T, depending on what their future in the near term or short term or longer term looks like. This is a map you've seen before, but I think it's just helpful to lay out the site. And I think you're all aware of the strengths and weaknesses here, which is really that it's a self-contained site. It does have good access to the highway. And most importantly, you know, depending on the user, very educated and skilled labor pool. So we'll just move on from here and just go to, this is something that the board is probably very familiar with. And, you know, as you'll see here, Shara, your older zoning map, which I tried to update with your new zone, but I wish I had the new one. But so, you know, just pointing out the property, you're all aware of what it is. It's in the OR office research zone. I'm not going to go through all of this, but we will come back to some of these underlying zoning, the uses that are permitted now versus what it could be, what it could look like in the near future. And again, you know, just 40 feet, 3 stories, which is flexible, you know, depending on the building definition and the grading of the site. And it encourages buffers and open space, which are always important. I'm not going to read the bulk table to you, but again, this is just for reference if we want to discuss it later.
That's first screen.
So this is a map that I think is, you know, going to be very useful here, which is the map of the environmental constraints on the site. And
Kate, it's Larry. If you could just go back to the existing conditions, and because on the screen that we're seeing, the type is a little small. So if you just, and I know you've done this before, but if you can just quickly go through the acreage and the existing uses. Just so once again, that for anyone who wasn't at your earlier presentation, they understand the acreage that we're looking at and some of the constraints on the property.
Okay.
Is there a way to maximize that too? And, you know, not that we don't want to see your face, smiling face, but maybe we can dispense with your face and the participants on the right and blow that report up as much as possible.
Yeah, that would be on your end. I have it shared at full screen on your end. So that this is, I think, where the pinning that people that you were talking about earlier came into play. You know, depending on whether people's faces were pinned or where the shared screen was pinned. If there's anything I can do, I'm happy to do that because that's obviously the idea. I'm just the voice.
If you guys go to view and go to standard, as opposed to side-by-side gallery, you should get a bigger screen.
You go, Anna.
Gold star for Anna.
I'm tech support now.
What she wants to do.
Standard.
All the way at the top.
And then we're
And then you can move the faces off to the side.
And we'll send a copy for everyone after the meeting, so you can have it for the record, and we'll get it.
Yes. And if you want me to go back a little, well, I don't know how much you saw this. These are we've seen before. This is just the land use. Is it showing up so you can see the presentation larger now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. So some of it might not be too exciting, but here you go. But so this is summary, just really a basic summary of the property, which is 194 acres. And this is in the environmental constraints map. This is just the building footprint and some of the area roadways. So this is just from your zoning ordinance, and the permitted uses are playgrounds, conservation areas, parks, public purpose, office buildings, and then research and engineering activities, which are specified to be scientific investigation, engineering study, product development, but those not involving manufacturing, sales, processing, or warehousing or fabrication, except as incidental to the permitted use. So really those type of activities that are more associated with light industry are really only, they're only permitted when it's almost like someone making prototypes or something like that. But even that, it would have to be, it's meant to be a limited thing. And obviously, Frank.
Can I ask a question? So
Yes.
someone who developed the technology there couldn't even go into some limited manufacturing there? By the way, we're defining the OR zone?
That's my understanding.
I think that's correct.
Yeah, I haven't had to apply that, obviously, in the township here, so I will defer to Frank. But my understanding is that if someone chose to, if you were a research company and you came up with a project and you said, okay, well, we want to use this site as our manufacturing site too, that's not really, that would not be permitted. And I think that's a really good question, because I think when you get to where we're kind of going with this, you're going to see how that fits into our recommendations for the site. It's really meant to allow, if these things are small things are being manufactured just in the, as part of the research, but not for distribution outside of the facility.
Some of this nanotechnology, the manufacturing is so
Really?
small, so minuscule.
Benign, yeah.
Yeah, it's really like a benign use depending on what you're manufacturing for sure. But when you're talking about telecommunications and semiconductors and things like that, I don't know. Well, again, not to reinvent the OR zone at this point, but I just want to understand what the limitations are.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that I think we're gonna make that a little clearer in a just very short period of time.
Could I just make one very quick observation?
Yes.
The standards that we're looking at here, the permitted uses and the bulk standards, are from the era of large scale campus type uses. And they're basically 50 or 60 years old. So I'm not saying that they're not still relevant or that we wouldn't like uses like this, but I would hope that we would be not thinking that what would have played very well 60 years ago is what we're still trying to have happen, especially at a site like this where AT&T was the blue chip tenant or owner, and then they were not because they were gone. So go ahead. I'm sorry, Kate, go ahead.
Yeah, no,
Good point.
I think
Good point.
that's excellent context, Frank, because zones get updated when they need to be updated, and when you've had a long-term user like AT&T, it hasn't, it hasn't been on the forefront until recently, which is why this is such a great proactive study here. So then here, this is just some of the bulk standards. This is where the building height, 40 feet, 3 stories. This is depending on the definition and how it's measured is changeable. If, for example, portions of the campus have 5 stories right now because of how they're graded and the way that the average height measures out. 50-foot buffers are required on all sides, and open space is a priority here. So this is just the bulk. This is just your bulk table existing with the notes on the side. Frank's probably very familiar with this. Some of the board members probably are, but this is again just for reference going back. And so this lot, which is 194 acres, is treated differently than smaller lots in the others because there are other properties in the township that are within this zoning district. So here's the environmental constraints map, and I hope that this is clear to everybody. So the one thing, if you look on here, we have the water, there's wetlands. And I think one thing that's important to note is that there is not only is there the North Branch of the Iron River, but that's a category 1 waterway. So that's where, the 300-foot buffer is required there. And that's in the sort of the middle of, I think you can probably see my mouse, but it's the middle of the site where that one space of wetlands is. So that really creates natural buffers for the site. And I think most of this is held in conservation easements right now. And so when we're looking at, and we're talking about developable area on the site, which may or may not be a priority, add more space, but it is going to be limited to this area, which is right where the existing, the phase 2 building was approved but not constructed, which is kind of in between building C and the parking lot. So this really these provide a natural buffer, but it does limit connectivity, which, you know, is in this case is still provides opportunities and isn't necessarily a bad thing. So here, just so when we're talking, we're going to probably, you know, give some examples of how some of the buildings could be used here. And for those of you who aren't familiar, I just wanted to give a quick layout of the site right now and how we talk about each of these buildings. So the arc-shaped on the top and bottom, or the bottom left and the upper right, are the north and south garages. And then there's all the buildings are interconnected, but the 3 buildings that really have the highest degree of connectivity are A, B, and C. And these are, you know, more typical office buildings on the campus where they have full height atriums, but they you know, when you walk in, it's familiar as an office building. And there's different features in different buildings. Like, for example, building C has an auditorium that, you know, holds a couple hundred people. I believe it's building B was renovated within the last 10 years or so to allow for, you know, a larger cafeteria, some shared workspaces, et cetera. And building D is the GNOC, the Global Network Operations Center, which is the newest of the buildings and also the most specially adapted for AT&T, which is really just because of it has networks of fiber, and it has some, not scientific lab, but it has some research space in there, or more than other buildings. So just moving on from there, these are, and you can see at the bottom right on the side of 287 here, you can see how that lays out all in here. So this is just some of the ways that we've looked at how the site can be handled in terms of, you know, upgrading it and for connectivity's sake, and really, you know, helping with the township's goals and the county's goals of making some kind of a comprehensive network. And I think we'll come back to some of these as we advance through this. So this is really, I think, where what we really wanted to talk to you about tonight, or really just wanted to share tonight, is that I think that the real crux here is going to be to make sure that the zoning is adaptable. And this goes back to what Frank just said and what you know, we were just talking about earlier, is that the idea of any type of new uses on this site or new zoning is that it's proactive rather than reactive. You know, for example, new uses are always, you know, they're always coming up, and Pete on our team mentioned this earlier, and I think it's a really good example because it's something that we have to deal with a lot in our field in New Jersey, which is, you know, about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, Wawa and Quick Checks, which we're not proposing here, but just an example. Wawas and Quick Checks began only pretty much building stores that were combination convenience and gas. And almost all zoning ordinances allowed convenience, some allowed convenience stores, some allowed gas stations, some allowed both, some allowed neither. And it's been very complicated all across the state, trying to figure out, you know, how to define this use that it maybe isn't new, but it kind of is. So, and I think, you know, now people are looking at it as just one use. So, but that's, you know, that's kind of a much smaller scale version of what we're looking at here, especially with how office and research and the scientific marketplace have changed over the last 40 years or so. So that's, you know, we're looking at emerging industries within the state and within the corridor that can be used to differentiate the site, and in particular, the market in and around Bedminster. And I think the goal here is that it will provide both you, the land use board, the township committee, and, you know, your professional staff, and even Walter, who's a booster of the county, with the ability to really help you quickly backfill these sites. And this is, you know, I think that also goes towards protecting your interests, where, you know, that the zoning needs to be looked at carefully so that it really is specific and specifically geared towards these type of clean, lighter processing type facilities. You know, it's not going to allow heavy industry. It's not going to allow Amazon warehousing or anything that's highly truck oriented. So, you know, that's I think where the careful consideration of the zoning comes into play. So we just, just quickly, we went through 3 scenarios on our last meeting, where we just kind of laid out different opportunities we saw for the site and some of the challenges. And also, obviously the best, the highest benefits could be gathered from each one. So in this case, what we've done is we've taken those 3, which were sort of a life science and biopharmaceutical innovation center, the idea of a high-tech hub that would really capitalize on AT&T's existing or former presence on the site. Excuse me, and then like a mixed use type of connection situation where it would really not so much be mixed use in terms of residential, but it would be mixed use where it would really welcome the public, onto the site and open it up in ways where there may be an opportunity to connect the typical office market or the office users to these new uses. So we've gone through each one, and we've looked at like different ways where we think that the zoning could really be changed in order to make that happen. And tonight, these scenarios are just for review. We're not asking you to pick one. And I think that, there's going to be a future here for any or all for the discussion to continue on these. So first is, I think, in terms of life science, we spoke to a few different people involved in the industry on various sides, and I think that one thing that they really stressed is that smaller companies are looking for space, and at this point, these companies might not know what kind of needs they're going to have in a couple years, or 10 years, 5-10 years down the line. And that goes to the example that was brought up before about a company that creates a product and then wants to manufacture it. And that's why, their life cycles from research until creation might not be predictable, but we think that there's ways to accommodate them. And part of that is looking to see if the unbuilt floor area, which is, between 300,000 and 400,000 square feet, could be, reoriented around the site in order to make, like for example, if a state-of-the-art lab facility or a pharmaceutical processing facility can be constructed adjacent to the existing office building, so that really can bring everything together. And just to speak about, this is really how this research, development, and production cycle all comes into play, where you begin with the laboratory and you go to product development and then processing. And then this is another case where there would be a home for AT&T or a similar type of company to stay in the facility in buildings C and D, for example. And so, just this is, it's a lot of words, but I'll go through it quickly. So, basically we reviewed the existing zoning, and this is that same line from one of the earlier slides where we looked at what's in your zoning. And this is what it is. So it's specifically not involving a lot of these processes unless there is explicitly incidental. And this is a case where, that's a judgment call. And I think that and that might be something that makes, that's not as quite as user-friendly as we think that it could potentially be. So, and we recommend limiting these new uses to things in, the fields like medicine, pharmacology, engineering. And it doesn't, you can even specify it as a more specific type of engineering, and you can do performance standards in place, because again, these are small facilities that don't have a lot, or small scale production that don't have a lot of trucks. They don't have odors. They don't have the typical noxious, I almost said side effects, but that's a pharmacy term, sort of externalities that are associated with it. And another thing is to look at parking needs here, because parking might be less than what's typically thought of for even for research and development or this type of facility where it might already be less than an office. But for example, here, you look at maybe 55% lab and production, 15% office space, and 30%, storage or mechanical areas, and you're already down to less parking. So that's another, I think, area with flexibility to be aware of. And then when we go to the high-tech hub scenario, this is, this is a little simpler because it really looks at, just taking what's there, keeping similar but expanded uses, and again, trying to this is something where the unbuilt floor area might, you might want it to go higher just because of for a modern building, but there's ways that, that can be targeted locations that won't compromise any buffers and obviously won't compromise any of the environmentally constrained areas. I think things that are important here are, looking permitted uses, because office building is what's permitted in this zone, and that's obviously a it means it generally is means something pretty straightforward. But here, there's audio, film and audio production, there's low impact flex space, and even maybe some type of very, low impact manufacturing here. And we discussed last time the idea of a hotel as an amenity. And a hotel is, another opportunity where where there might be able to add more building area to the site. But, a hotel isn't so much, the rooms and the number of rooms dictate the intensity of a hotel rather than the floor area. So that's almost like a separate thing to consider outside of just new office space. And then the final scenario that we had previously discussed was just use connections, which is, really looking at your location in Bedminster and the natural beauty of the where you keep the core office space, and then you look at non-traditional, non-office settings throughout the site, and you see where you can put things in. So again, the environmental constraints will serve as the buffer. You expand the permitted uses but without off, multifamily or any kind of residential. But things like maybe another opportunity for a hotel or a couple, 100,000 square feet of different types of restaurant, event space, or commercial recreation. So you still have the office space there, which helps, the site keep its value if that is backfilled in a way that does have some of these new uses that you might have seen in the other scenarios, while also really opening up the site. So that's pretty much our final. That's I think where we, we're going to turn the conversation back to Walter to kind of talk about what our next, our next step is. Again, we're really thankful for the time you've allowed us to have in front of this board over the last month. And we're happy to hear what else you have to say tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
Thanks, Kate. And Walter, we're coming back to you now.
Yes, so I think just to recap, I guess, before we get into next steps, I guess I'll kind of open it up to questions from the board. I think one key thing just to remember for that was with all three scenarios, all these three scenarios allow AT&T to continue on the site in some shape or form. So none of these are pushing AT&T off of the site. There's ways of maximizing opportunities with or without them, depending on what their long-term plans are. So I think that's key to note that because one of the goals is retaining high tech and high employment, and having AT&T remain is still a priority. But also Kate outlined strategies that if they do decide to leave, how else this site can be best maximized and continue to be a great asset to the township. So I just want to reinforce that point. So with that, I guess, are there any questions about, I know we just put a lot of information to you, but I think
I could ask
a lot of work over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's very impressive, if I could say that. And my one question would be, as we go through this analysis and we see that manufacturing was not a permitted use previously, and then we talk about fabrication and production and terms like that, I'm not so worried that they're going to create a problem, partly because of the sectors of the business that we would allow to do those kinds of things according to this recommendation. So I think that's really good. But I do think that we have to be clear about what types of manufacturing would ultimately fall outside of what we mean by those other terms.
Agreed. I think one of the things that we heard during the outreach process is providing the more clarity that can be provided by the township of what you're looking for on that helps market the site for these other opportunities if AT&T decides to reduce their footprint or leave completely.
Right.
So I think, yeah, so that's definitely going to be one of the recommendations. I would like to say is so if there's three scenarios we presented, it's up to the township. If you want to focus on one, we can give some more detailed zoning recommendations. Or if you want to keep all your options open and have more, the three scenarios of how the township can move forward, we can give some zoning recommendations at a higher level, as well as master plan, what should be changed in the master plan. But I can't do detail for all three of the scenarios. We just don't have the resources to do that. And if we leave it as the three general recommendations, with the skeleton, so to speak, of what should be changed or tweaked in the zoning, then that if we leave it up to the township to define, to add rest of the muscles to it and complete the plan, for lack of using the anatomy terms as describing our options.
Walter, if I heard everything correctly, none of these alternatives include residential development, right?
Correct.
Was there a specific determination that a mixed use like that should not be provided here?
Frank and Larry, I can talk to that, because in the earlier conversations that I had with Walter and the planning team, we talked about the town's, what the town's goals were, and with the satisfaction of affordable housing. It took really, that effort itself took a lot of burden off of Bedminster from a residential standpoint. And from the township committee's position and some of the early conversations, residential mixed, certainly multifamily residential, was not viewed favorably for this site.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. And the reason I asked the question was not so much because I think it's an alternative that we need to think about, but in many cases, these mixed use developments have a lot of vitality that comes from the residential component. Sometimes it supports the commercial or whatever, but I just was curious about why that might not be a worthwhile thing to look at.
And given the site's location and its connections or enhanced connections to both the hills and Bedminster Village, some of that vitality is already there. And if you're going to squeeze additional residential into that property, you might actually work off of some of the benefits of the other uses that we're discussing. So I will say, Frank, that we did have those discussions. Residential was not a preferred use for the site.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate you taking the time for that. Thanks.
I'd like to just make a couple of observations, to that end. And if we, within our guiding principles, if we're making some judgment, the thing that I'm most excited about in this agenda and what you've kind of outlined is the zoning adaptability. Because I think if we were to say, and I don't have any statistics off the top of my head, but perhaps one of the planners does, but if I were to say 75% of the investment dollars, speaking as like from an owner developer's perspective now, 75% of the investment dollars over the last couple of years in New Jersey has been in either multifamily or industrial uses, warehouses, distribution centers. We look down the long side of our nose at people like Amazon and in these 1 million square foot warehouses, et cetera. But that's where most of the investment is. So if we're taking ourselves out of play of the two most attractive investment opportunities for owner developers, we just make our job here more challenging. Now, I think we're talking about a matter of degrees here. The things that make other office developments more popular, the spaces that are most popular with the lowest amount of vacancy in the state of New Jersey are places like Morristown, are places like Summit, where they're getting top dollars for rents. Meanwhile, Parsippany, the 78 corridor from the Garden State Parkway all the way out here to 287 is 35% vacant in terms of sheer office. So owners and developers are talking about taking office product off the market, converting it for some other purpose to bring those vacancy numbers down a little bit, to make the properties that they still continue to hold and offer as office space more marketable. So I think the answer here is really this, some sort of mixed use, but moreover than that, allow somebody who's doing R&D to not only do the R&D there, but to do some limited amount of manufacturing there, and to do a little bit amount of, warehouse and storage there, so that they can have a one-stop facility, especially for these people that do small batch manufacturing. For them to have an office in Summit and warehouse in Dayton and a manufacturing facility in Bound Brook, may be impractical. But if we can allow, if we're going to do something on the high tech end, towards that end, if we can allow all those functions to be in one location, there's some gravy in that recipe.
And Rich, that was actually a point, and Kate did talk about it, that was raised by one of the industry experts from life sciences. And it goes even a little further than that. So it's not just co-locating your office, your research, and making the distinction between research and development and pre-manufacturing, and then pre-manufacturing to manufacturing of the life sciences products. But also that, what's also interesting about that industry is that, and this is something that Colin is certainly familiar with, you start out small, right? You may start out with 5,000 square feet.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
As your product passes stage 1 compliance, you now go to 15,000 square feet. Great. You now get your approval from FDA, and the angel investors just swarm in, and you go from. So now you're going to 50. Now you're going to 50,000 square feet.
Exactly with that scenario.
And you want that flexibility in. No one wants to move, but you want that flexibility within the space.
If the tenant brings them, if the landlord brings them in at 5,000 square feet, they want to be able to keep them while all that happens.
Exactly.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And Kate, really, I think that the presentation tonight, it was just one little bullet point, but like there was a lot of discussion that went into that bullet point. So, Kate, if you want to address Rich's point, but I think Rich, in your experience from a landlord developer, jives directly with what we heard from the life science folks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same could work, not to interrupt you, Kate, but I would think the same could work even from, so whether it's the tech or the life science, very similar kind of things. Even if you had like a generic manufacturer from India or some foreign place, right? They're opening a beachhead here in New Jersey where they're going to do some sales and marketing from here. The large scale manufacturing is done abroad someplace, but to be able to warehouse it here and distribute it from here is also an opportunity.
You would particularly in the tech field where you would do the assembly here, because a lot of that manufacturing is very specialized, and to your point, it's done overseas, brought back here, and then it's assembled. So that's really where it is.
But you also, look, and not to dismiss that, but at the same point, in the square footage area, if you're looking at a higher value for the office, the research, the manufacturing, through that entire process, the warehousing is always going to be a little bit different. So if you're doing mass warehousing, you're going to go to 22, you're going to go to 287, 78.
Yeah, but whether it's last mile warehousing or the stuff that is not bulky,
Right.
Pills are not,
right.
Microchips are not bulky. You can deliver 10,000 microchips and they're in a boxes.
Exactly. So one of the great comments we heard from the life science, or one of the life sciences experts, was, and this is once again focusing on life sciences, but it does hold true for high tech as well, is that the finished product might be, let's say it's going to be an additive for a vaccine, right? You could have 500,000 doses in one truck. So the storage, the warehousing for that product is not a 800,000 square foot Amazon distribution facility.
Yeah.
Could be looking
Could be
at
100,000 square foot warehouse.
It could be 5,000 square feet. They'd just be where they store that material, that product for distribution to somewhere else. Where it gets,
I'm just, as long as we have this zoning adaptability, we have this flexibility to go from, flexible office spaces to R&D and manufacturing, it's going to be hard, to do 900,000 square feet or 1.3 million. Is that the number that the site can accommodate, 1.3 million in terms of the floor area ratio?
Yes.
So to do 1.3 million, 15 or 20,000 square feet at the time is going to take a long time.
So that also is
we have the
it's
better.
not staying there. So
Yes.
AT&T could still have a presence, and some of these other spaces, if they need less space, can be repurposed for that. And I think also one thing with some of the market trends, it was definitely for this limited manufacturing for bioscience, biologics, pharmaceutical. There's a strong market demand for that, and being able. What makes this site unique is that the workforce in and around the township and the county is a high-tech, highly educated workforce that could be some sort of STEM type of industry. That built-in workforce is here. So that's a unique asset that other places don't necessarily have. I think the county has one of the highest percentage of people with engineering and PhD degrees. So that means there's that talent here. And the idea is with being able to scale this is that a small company can start and grow and create new jobs here that may not exist currently.
Yeah.
Is there a way you define manufacturing? Because I think for a lot of people, especially people my age or older, for a lot of people, manufacturing means smokestacks and chemicals and a lot of ink and all that stuff. But nowadays, when we talk about manufacturing, this stuff is done in a relatively clean manner. So when we define something as manufacturing, can we set parameters about what kind of manufacturing without being too limiting?
so, we'll give a little behind the scenes scoop. So my discussions with Kate, Walt, and Pete over the last couple of weeks, hey guys, you got to come up with a better term than manufacturing.
That's the connotation.
Yeah, if there's another way, if more descriptive or that's certainly something that's more apt for what we're seeing in today's markets. But in order to get this presentation, in the form it is, Kate went with manufacturing. But maybe perhaps in the presentation.
I thought I tried to stick with fabrication. I did. But yeah,
the conversation we had prior to the team call before this is that when we're talking about not wanting industry, it's not the smoke, this manufacturing is definitely, we use the same term, not smokestacks. It's a clean, 3D printing is manufacturing, but there's not necessarily we're not trying to create the Merck facility that's in Linden and Rahway here.
Mhm.
That's not what that's not what this advanced manufacturing is going to look like. So
Yeah, and I would also-
question.
Manufacturing have a particular,
Lou has his hand up. Lou would like to ask. Go ahead, Lou.
Yeah, it'd be okay if someone else could get a chance to ask a question once in a while. So this question is for Kate and for Walter and for Frank, and it's completely different topic. And my question is, it's great to decide what we might want to be able to put in this location. However, looking from a macro view, from a 10,000 elevation look down, how many people really want to, how many companies, how many corporations, how many people really want to come to New Jersey at this point in time? It seems like all of our companies are moving out. Pharmaceuticals used to be the hub of pharmaceuticals, it's gone. Used to be the hub of communications, it's gone. So if any one of the planners can answer to me that question, because it's great to talk about what kind of things you might want here, but I'm concerned it would be empty. So anything to do with that would be, I'd like to hear something.
Sure,
Can I just make, I'll defer to the consultants because they're hired to help us with this. I'll just make one comment. This whole life science area that we're talking about, clusters of those types of uses become extremely valuable places to keep growing that kind of business. We know that the Nestle facility down in Bridgewater is a world-class version of one of those types of facilities, and all of those research offices that they have at the Center for Excellence, I think are part of that sort of thing. So if we think about being part of that cluster, we're right up the street from that. I think the manufacturing aspects that we might all be afraid of, if they were a little better defined and limited, probably are not very things to be very afraid of. And I'll be quiet and listen to the consultants. Thank you.
And just, I agree with Frank. That's a good example of, we want to try to encourage the growth of those clusters and provide the opportunities for that. I think COVID is going to be changing market trends and the way things are going. There's going to be looking for more of onshoring of some of this manufacturing and research and R&D development, just for supply chain and logistics reasons. And I think there's going to be a lot more, there's a couple articles I've read over the last couple of months of like the messenger RNA type of vaccines, which that type of treatment, there's a lot of opportunities to address a wide range of acute and chronic diseases, and building and providing that kind of opportunity here sets us apart and positions ourselves to take advantage of that potentially growing industry. So I think, some of the changes the state's made and recently adopted the new Emerge program, which is the old version of the new version of the economic incentive grants, the Grow New Jersey program, which is providing resources to attract investment to New Jersey. Now we have a program that, an incentive program that didn't exist for a year and a half when the old legislation expired. Bedminster, being there pursuing endorsed plan status from the state plan, will make this site eligible for those incentives. So putting a plan in place will help attract that investment. So planners, we tend to be optimistic looking forward. So we're trying to set up for success, and defining what your vision the township has and providing some detail to that will help position the township to be at the front of the line for potential investment, not at the end of the line. So hopefully that, and I'll have Kate and Pete to add in if Frank has anything else.
That's perfect, Walter.
Why we're doing this.
Yeah. I think agree with both of what Walter and Frank just said. I just have one more planner with one more thing to add, which is that something that I've seen, that I think we've all been seeing as we've done work on this study, and just what I've seen on my other clients throughout, the state over the last year, especially, is that companies are interested in coming to where there's already good talent and where they think they'll be able to attract more of that type of talent. And in this case, we know New Jersey is trying to overcome their reputation for expensive costs, expensive startup pricing. But when it comes down to it, especially when you look at these emerging sectors, whether it's biotech or whether it might end up being computer engineering or something, anything like that, they're going to come to a place where they can have available and they can attract the type of talent that they need and want. And, while the suburban office market has, taken a huge hit in the last 20 years, this is still a site in a really desirable area, an hour from New York City. And I think that's a place where a lot of companies are going to want to be more, especially as it's going to become more competitive to attract talent who might otherwise go to a remote job or something like that.
Thank you.
Mhm. Anyone else on the board have a question?
Carol, I did have a question for
Yeah, sure.
a couple of comments. One, in response to Lou, I think, Lou, we have to recognize that our current OR zone of this property, let's just focus on this property, doesn't fit well into that marketplace that you have identified as declining. And the the fact is that this property may not be that suitable for that many other uses besides some sort of adaptive reuse of the existing buildings and maybe some additions. So looking at it and sort of reinventing the OR zone that applies is a wise idea, especially looking forward. And that's what we're doing by this study. So when we talk about these things, it's interesting that OR, office research, is a classic zone for what AT&T did. In fact, the zone probably was written for AT&T basically. And yet there are other zones that are classic zones that are research, office, manufacturing, ROM. There's even zones that do other things. A classic zone doesn't sound like what people are talking about here. It sounds like we are aiming towards what is a master plan amendment to have a new future land use area, with some new name, and it probably won't truly be mixed use, even if we did that mixed use version that Kate talked about, because you saw a mixed use zone, which was the property on the KRE property. That's really more of a mixed use, meaning residential with retail with office, as opposed to having a hotel on a office property. But when I hear what people are talking about, it makes me think of something that is sort of done for special office research and manufacturing zones, which is basically to allow all of these uses. We don't want to say you can't have drug company. We don't want to say you can't have a high-tech electrical engineering company. We want to make it possible, I think, for many of these users to easily move into a building that would be renovated to suit their needs. And Rich Travagliano has talked about over the months, and Anna too, and all of you, about all the updating that people are doing to try to attract new tenants to come to existing buildings and retrofit buildings. And so it sounds like some of the freedom, that we want to allow in the zoning, which, by the way, you have to write in words in the zoning. So you have to say what is allowed in order for somebody to easily move right in. Move right in without a site plan approval, perhaps, or move right in fitting into a previous site plan approval by the owner of the property. And the ways to do that are to put that flexibility right in the master plan and right in the ordinance. And an example might be to say, you can have office research and accessory manufacturing and warehousing for the office research user. So you try to define the office and research and development users as the industries that you want. And then you try to make the warehousing and the manufacturing, which, frankly, that the word manufacturing is more than just fabrication. Fabrication means putting things together, maybe making some minor changes. Manufacturing really means making a new product. And that's not terrible. And it can be done in a very environmentally sound way, thanks to modern technologies. So, but maybe what we're really focusing on is we want that manufacturing to be related to some significant office or research and development user, not just, manufacturing widgets in a mill, and not just warehousing for Amazon. We don't really want a principal use of warehousing. We want that warehousing to be something that encourages the, let's call it the high tech or the drug company to be there. And this is all changing. I mean, the biotech industry is incredible with the things that they do with manufacturing, basically manufacturing a vaccine with bacteria, in a vat. Is that terrible to do? No, it has to be done like incredibly carefully and under incredible control, incredible treatment, FDA inspection and review. And no discharge, no, no, no contamination by anything. And so to some extent, if you could define the users for both office and research and development, and then tie the warehousing and the manufacturing and fabrication to those, I think we could probably make it work. And yes, you can have performance standards on manufacturing, and yes, you can put them in the ordinance, but in order for them to be enforceable, they have to be in the ordinance. And they can't be something that is preempted by some other state agency. But there are ways to both allow and regulate by words and map all of these things you're trying to do. So I think it's great work by Kate and the team. And I think, this is good planning. And Richard is reinventing the zone. That's sort of what you as the planning board get to recommend to the township committee. So there's a master plan study, a master plan amendment, and an ordinance recommendation. The only thing I want to say, another thing,
Thanks, Tom.
and that is to Kate, if she could, I think you got to try to merge 1 and 2. I understand mixed use is not really the one, but I wish you wouldn't make us pick 1, 2, or 3.
No, there's no picking involved. And that actually, I was just about to comment. I'll let Frank wants to just have a comment real quick, because I have a follow-up as well.
Thanks, Kate, and mine is very quick. I think what Tom was saying pretty much echoes what your presentation said earlier, which is there would be this limited list of types of uses, life science, biological, things that we would then not have a problem with manufacturing being a part of those uses, but it wouldn't be manufacturing of widgets like Tom said, or any of these other things. It would be very specifically building on the kind of cluster that we want to become a part of. And I'll stop. Go ahead, Kate. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, that's a great lead in, because I was just going to say, Tom, that I thank you for, I think that was an excellent summary and a very good, way of framing how, how a study becomes an ordinance. But the only nuance I want to catch there is that when you say, accessory manufacturing or fabrication to a office or research user, that's what's permitted now. And I think that's what we want to step away from, because I think that's too narrow for what we're looking for here. And I think what we, it's a really slightly different framing, but I think the idea is going, to really just say the industries up front and say that anything, that's going on this property, it is associated with pharmacology, high tech equipment, or maybe not equipment, but things like that, rather than having it be accessory to the office and the research. Because I think what we want to cite, I think that what we're seeing, and this, it definitely happens with life science, and it also happens with industries that are, maybe not as prevalent, like software and that type of startup company, but they or startups that kind of are create a product, but they can go very quickly from just 10 people in an office and 10 people in a laboratory to actually doing production on that site. And I think it gets a little challenging, especially when you're trying to attract new users, to have to differentiate between what's accessory or incidental and what type of use is just permitted. So that's, I think it's just a little nuance there, but I think that it's otherwise, that's the exact idea that we're trying to get across here.
Thanks, Kate.
Kate, just to follow up on that, the comment, and maybe this was Frank's comment about forcing the planning board to choose between A, B, or C. That certainly is not the intent. Is that these are 3 categories of zoning alternatives, but they're not to be viewed as an either or situation, but in conjunction with each other.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, the idea that I just stated, about naming the industries or naming the fields and what can be done on top of just on top of just regular office or regular laboratory. That's just one component of that. And then, if someone comes in and they see this site and they say, I think that we can use this portion of this property for, a destination restaurant or even a hotel or something like that. The idea isn't that, then, oh, we can't do anything else. The idea is to make sure that the zoning is written in a way where it balances, the intensity of various uses on the site. It's just from personal, from our professional experience where we don't foresee, if a high-tech lab users were going to come in here, that isn't really conducive to, the public engaging with it. But nothing's meant to be either or to dismiss or have to pick and choose.
Was there any consideration given to modifying the bulk standards? When you talk about some of the constraints for the site, whether there's wetlands or how it's kind of bifurcated by the piece of wetlands, is there any thought given to modifying the bulk standards to allow more, for lack of a better word, yield on the site?
I think that, that's an interesting question, because a lot of things, the only two things you could really look at here were, we did make some recommendations for potentially looking at changes to building height standards, at least in certain locations. The other thing is that, and Pete, you might be able to speak about this a little better, because I haven't really stopped talking, and I apologize to everybody for that. I can, once you get me started. But I think that the constraints really provide a natural buffer to the site, and it, depending on what kind of users end up here, if it's not a type of manufacturing or anything with lower parking calculations or lower parking requirements, then you would have to look at more impervious coverage and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, Kate, we talked about this earlier. The real encumbrances are the environmental constraints. You mentioned the 300-foot stream buffer, the easements, and those things as much as anything else. And in terms of where you can actually put something. I mean, if you go to, I think it's the next slide, Kate, we have the buildings highlighted.
Yes.
I mean, basically that area to the left of N and above A, that's where you can build. And that area of the little grid that's just on a diagonal up from the N, that's the surface parking. So those are the places where you can actually build. Really, almost everywhere else you can. And those two curved areas, the S and the N shapes, those are the parking structures, which take up a lot of space. And Kate talked about the flexibility. I mean, if we actually do get this sort of diverse mix of uses, the traffic demand, the parking demand won't all be at the same time. The labs and some of the other uses would have different peaking characteristics. So you wouldn't necessarily need to have enough parking for every desk in every building all at one time. And if you restructure the security, which is part of the GNOC and some of the AT&T uses, then you sort of remove that bottleneck as well. I mean, there's not a lot of room to build new roads here, but where you can actually build is very limited. It's really just that area above the, adjacent to the parking structure and above the 3 ABC buildings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would also say that this map shows to the waterways and the wetlands, but it doesn't even show the full extent of the category 1, because I think some parts of the site might be pre-existing before those strict regulations came into effect, but that there is a 300-foot buffer that has to be met.
And Frank, I think you also mentioned the other performance standards. I mean, the height is maybe one area where you can loosen it up and maybe go a little bit higher, like if there was a hotel structure or something like that, because for the most part, the site is invisible to town, and that's considered to be sort of a strength, because you can have this sort of massive workspace here without people seeing, all these thousands of people and thousands of cars coming in every day.
Peter, I think there is room for some of that flexibility, and it's nice to see you again. We've been doing it for years, right?
Yep.
I think part of what we want to be clear about here is that if there's going to be a new vision for the site, part of what made AT&T special was the location and the dedication to a very explicit type of use. And one part of my fear is, and I don't criticize anybody for the use of the word backfilling, except that backfilling to me, it sounds a little bit like we need to get the space filled. And maybe that would encourage us to compromise on what kind of a vision we have for what users we want here. It strikes me that a lot of the space, that the best opportunity on this site has already been built on. And as you said, Peter, there's a very limited opportunity, and there is an opportunity for some more construction, and we approved that 300,000 square feet years ago. So it's not as though that could never happen. That's all good stuff. But I'm just a little bit afraid that unless we know who we want to be when we grow up, we're going to end up with a lot of different people trying. Let's figure out what the cluster is in the broader sense, not just life sciences or any of the kind of typical explanation, but that broad group where if they bring in manufacturing, it would be okay because it would come with the kind of use that we really want to encourage.
Yeah, exactly. Frank, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we heard that exactly last time. We've actually, this is just one piece of the picture. Walter can summarize this. We've spoken with the building owners, the tenants, spoken with this group several times, some other groups at the township. We spoke to some developers who are specialize in the life sciences, and is made very clear that this is an economic driver for the township, and it's a sort of a lifestyle driver, a very high value site, highly skilled employee base, and that so if life sciences and high tech are a strength for New Jersey, Somerset County and this region, this is where the workforce is. So it is definitely something that's built around that skill set. And when when Kate talked about sort of that life cycle of life sciences, that going from idea to a desktop to a piece of the lab to process chemistry to testing to a product to the marketplace, they're all within that sort of high tech sector. We're not, coming up with a better tire. We're coming up with, vaccines, things like that. And so a high-tech product or high-tech life sciences type activity. So it is very much based in that idea that it's an economic driver. It's built around the skill set that's available here. And, the possibility also that people that work in New York and, some of the buildings in Newark or other places that maybe don't want to travel that far, this could be sort of like a local remote work site. So, and if the AT&T is retained and they want to stay here, they fit perfectly. If not, someone with with a similar workforce profile and labor profile could fit right into there. So I think is that kind of what you were talking about, Frank?
Exactly. Thank you, Peter. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I was just going to add that I think that doing this study is setting the vision for what the township wants on this site. So you're being proactive, you're continuing the long history of proactive and excellent planning that the township has done over the course of its existence to create the great place that the township is. But it also is that you have a plan, so you're not pressured onto taking something less than what you want in the future. You're defining the vision. Defining this vision is going to self-select some of the uses that people are going to come to you with proposals for. If you're clear that you don't want warehousing, it's going to be clear to the development community, the traditional warehousing, the Amazon or the 8A type of facilities, that you don't want that. So you're also saving the development community the hassle of thinking they have a chance to do something. So I think you're trying to make sure you're protecting the township's interest. But going back to one of the original goals was, having an employment center here, and the high employment that AT&T brings, having those jobs here, if it's AT&T or someone else. I think when we said backfilling, that's what we kind of meant, that to continue the economic activity on the site.
Exactly.
In line with what the township's vision for is. It was never, I think, intended to be like, we'll take anything, suggesting that anything comes along to pay rent. You want to make sure it's.
I never thought you meant that, Walt. I didn't
I
think Kate
know.
meant that, but I wanted everybody to be real clear that we're not just taking whatever comes along. Thank you.
Exactly. No.
Yes, and it's a
Point well
great
taken,
point.
Frank.
And as planners, we don't have a crystal ball. The big thing that comes up, like Kate mentioned, the Wawa. So, the things that have come in the last 30 years, the big box stores, is it convenience or gas or convenience? Is it, and now it's the warehousing. We catch up to those things. We really can't envision that. So what we're trying to do is sort of get a little bit of ahead of the curve based on what's hot right now, what's selling, what can be done with this building. And we have buildings that can accommodate uses. We have a market sector that's strong in New Jersey, and we have people that can do the work, but we have words in ordinances that don't allow that life cycle of idea to marketplace to happen. So what we're trying to do is introduce enough flexibilities that these synergies can occur without opening the door to things that we don't want. So that's what it is. It's sort of a game of balancing act between flexibility, but not being a victim of your own zoning.
Ridiculous. I have a couple of questions. I think the mayor stated before that the towns of Morristown and Summit have been relatively successful in the corridor along 78, even in the more eastern counties has not been successful. And I'd like to know from the planners what it is in those two municipalities that you think have made them successful, and to what extent, if any, does that have some impact on what we're discussing?
I think when the mayor who it was that was in the context of offices, and I think that that the two things that those towns have is good train access, more so for Summit and just in the general area, because people, even if they don't take the train every day, can be helpful. And the other thing is that the atmosphere is there, where, it is, especially Morristown, when you have a county seat, that really provides a different type of office space, not just for, legal users, but just in general, it just becomes really a gathering place. And the other thing is, I think that they do have an environment that attracts younger people to want to live there and work there, and vice versa. So I think that, and one thing is that, especially with Summit, it's a little different than Morristown, but Summit, there tends to be not as quite larger scale. If you were in fact talking about the downtown area, in Morristown, they have done a lot of work on some new projects, but I think that they've really created a true mixed use area where that's really like a gathering point for both employment and socialization. I'm making this sound so not lively, but obviously we know what Morristown is like, and it's really just become such a point of interest for a whole region.
Is there anything that we should be doing as a general basis which would enhance the desirability of Bedminster in that regard?
I think that for a site like this, the desirability is going to come from the companies themselves. And I think that we've talked about small, not small, but things like, really that play up the beauty of the site, the access to the site. But I think what's going to be unique here is going to be the type of facility that it is, and the type of either owner developer, or the type of owner or the type of company that sees themselves at this site, and people will follow. It's not, people aren't going to choose it because it's convenient. Like Morristown or Summit might be, or areas like this. And obviously it's not that this is inconvenient, but I think it's a different type of atmosphere. It's a very different environment. And we have to look at how, what type of companies or even what type of industries will thrive in this environment. And obviously, you have one thing you have here that they don't have in Morristown or Summit is just sheer space. This amount of office space available. And I think another thing that, we mentioned last time, but these buildings are built to, they were built to a higher caliber than your typical, in terms of obviously like telecommunications and wiring, but just a lot of their baseline construction was built to a different level than your typical suburban office of its era, just because of the unique nature of AT&T. Like the ceiling plates might be a little higher. It has like the floor plates are tougher. So, that's not my area of expertise, but in our conversations, that's something that also sets this site apart from typical adaptive reuse or just any type of reuse of this suburban facility.
And I think the surrounding amenities that are in Bedminster and the county make it more attractive and set it apart from those other areas. The township has an excellent and extensive trail network. You don't have that in Summit or Morristown to have those other recreational opportunities. You have some other, bustling downtown, but not all companies necessarily want that. They want, there's companies that are more focused on the healthy lifestyle, which, having the recreational amenities in and around this area can't compete with that. And also, I think the market is moving, some of the market is moving towards de-densifying some of the office locations in more urban centers like that, and having a mix where you can, in the suburban area, you can be a little bit more spread out. The home sales are going crazy in the suburban areas, not necessarily in the urban areas. So that means the workers are looking for that mix of amenities that, I think Bedminster and the county can offer that some more of the more developed, urban hubs that are to the east of us can't necessarily offer. And that becomes a talent attraction retention type of benefit that this site has that others don't.
So, and what about, are there other municipalities that are somewhat similar in being upscale to Bedminster who've dealt with this problem recently? And what have they done?
Walter, we all took a trip a while ago to look at the site in Homedale that Somerset Development bought and has made this multi-use place out of. Are we thinking of that as any kind of a example of what we might try to have happen here?
But, if you look, there's some that are more urban and there's some that are less urban. So obviously Merck left Reddington and that was vacant for quite a while. And I don't know what their game plan had been. And the Homedale site, and I'm not, it's probably a stupid question. I don't know of anything that you can put in a zoning ordinance which would encourage startups. I'm not sure that would require any special provisions, but if there are, then they should be included.
Well, I think, sorry, Walter, if you want to go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the adaptability of the zoning recommendations that we talked about are how you encourage a startup to locate here and then grow. I think so. That's kind of where we're going with that. It's not, you're not building a dedicated incubator space where, that's being subsidized like as a WeWork or those types of models, but allowing the flexibility of the zoning for a company to locate here and grow, it would set itself apart. And I think there's probably some developments that are up in like Madison and there's other similar areas where like in Parsippany Troy Hills, and I'm trying to think of like Morris Knolls, maybe Morris Plains, or where some of these single-use office developments are being repurposed like that. And I guess another is Berkeley Heights, with the condo property is kind of similar to this, where it was pure office and they put some amenities in similar to our mixed-use connections type of thing. So there's some retail, there's some restaurants, there's a hotel that's, mixing of the uses and creating that more vibrant hub without necessarily having a lot of new housing being built, because you have the housing opportunities just on the other side of your walking trail or your hiking trail, like connections.
It's also, well, what's also striking about some of this conversation is something that we had heard from the industry experts, that when you're looking at the life sciences industry, and just generalized, it's a more mature workforce.
Yes.
Not necessarily right out of college in the 20s. It's more established, as you said, with the advanced degrees, masters and PhDs, and they're looking for that suburban lifestyle rather than the urban lifestyle. And what struck me from some of the conversations was when you're looking at the Connell complex in Berkeley Heights, and you throw in the restaurants, and if you can certainly accommodate that here, that's great. But if you look at from the life sciences standpoint, that's nice, but the amenities are not as important for the life science campus than they are for the high-tech mixed-use campus. So having that flexibility to accommodate both, I think is interesting, and it's a good good goal. And I know this may touch upon some of Steve's points as well, but that each of these properties and how they develop, is a little unique, right? So the Bell Works down in Homedale, a different platform than what you're seeing in Berkeley Heights, but the same sort of idea of bringing in multiple uses onto one campus and having the flexibility to bring in the 200,000 square foot tenant at the same time that you're accommodating, the 1,200 square foot coffee shop.
And I think was one thing to add. I know I didn't mean to cut Kate off earlier. I think one thing just to add is as the millennial cohort ages, that they may, there's a lot of looks like the trend is going to be they've just delayed moving to the suburbs. As they start to have families, they're going to want to live in maybe a more suburban area than an urban area where there's a backyard. And we've seen that with the pandemic, with people moving out of the more urban areas for wanting more space. And as Dean Hughes from the Blaustein School calls the digerati, mature, they might want not necessarily be in a 24/7 place like a Hoboken or Morristown. They may want to have a smaller lot, like live in more of a townhouse community or something where it's a little bit more spread out to have space. And that in Bedminster and Somerset County, these suburban office markets may come back, because what we've seen is that the businesses will follow the talent. And if the talent wants more amenities that you can't necessarily get in a more urban area with more open spaces and more parks and great schools, suburban areas become more attractive. And I could see some of the employment shifting back to the suburbs to some degree, but in more walkable, community-based types of things instead of a standalone office complex in the middle of a greenfield in the middle of a more rural county. That's not necessarily where people are going to want to be.
And I just have just to answer the first question, just to go back, or the initial question here. And I think one thing that both Bell Works and the Connell property have in common, and they have taken different approaches, and even their backgrounds are different, but they both have, both projects were really started by people with like a developers with a vision for the site that were willing to go all in on something. And I think that there's different things here. For example, the Connell family owned the property, and they saw that things were changing, and they decided that this was the direction they wanted to take their family development business in. And in Homedale, you had an iconic building. It's a historic landmark. It's breathtaking, and it just seemed like, what the heck are we going to do with this? And Somerset Development stepped in and said, let us try. So I think that, that's not something you can count on, and finding someone to go all in on the site. And that speaks to what Frank said before, which is that AT&T was willing to commit to, really making this unique site work in a unique way. And so we're trying to build, instead of kind of reinventing, the whole site and imagining that someone brings in all these new uses with a full commitment to it. We're hoping that the next phase of this property will look more similar to the current conditions there, because AT&T and now MetLife have been stewards of this property.
Now, Kate, the one comment I would make to that is when we're talking about moving forward with the zoning, we have to be mindful that there's no permanence for these structures. So building A, building B, building C, even building B with building D with the GNOC, unlike Homedale, which has this iconic architecture, and there's some, you know, some history associated with AT&T's presence and all the Nobel
Satellites, lasers.
exactly
all kinds of crazy
everything
stuff.
that was developed down there. The Bedminster campus for AT&T, basically back office space other than the GNOC, right? There's a lot of infrastructure and fiber and information infrastructure that's there, but the structures themselves are emblematic of 1970s
Long distance,
corporate.
They're
And-
functional for their intended purpose.
But in today's market, it's not how office buildings, to the extent office buildings are being built today, but they don't look like that. So I think to some extent, the planning board, as we go through the next iteration of looking at AT&T and the final report from Pete and Kate, you know, be mindful that, you know, maybe building D with the GNOC stays, building A, B, and C, MetLife or whoever else is going to be operating there may say, you know, we're going to sacrifice 1, 2, or maybe all of them because they don't work for what we want to see there. And I'm saying that's the property owner and operators down the road. So I think it is something that we should be mindful of as we proceed.
Do any of the board members have any questions for either Kate or Walter? No, not seeing anyone. Thank you. I think it was a great.
So what is, you know, I'll bring it back to Walt. So Walt, what's the, when do we, I mean, I know I know these are, the last 2 meetings are public meetings for sure. But it's not the formal presentation of the final report. So what's our schedule?
So based on the information and the feedback we've received tonight, we will add some additional details to the 3 scenarios of potential zoning recommendations or master plan amendments. And then we'll draft a report and then we could share it with the board for review and present it, you know, in the next month or 2 to get final feedback and, you know, finalize the report and wrap up this project and then, you know, give you a roadmap to move forward with after our study is done, and so the process can continue.
Great, and well, for that presentation, I'd probably schedule this as both a joint meeting of the Township Committee and the Land Use Board so that we bring the governing body in with the Planning Board, Land Use Board together, and we can do it all at once.
That would be great. We're here to serve you as our client for this project. So let us know how you would like us to proceed, and we'll make it happen.
Great. So if we should be looking at, is that something we should be looking at for August or September at this point?
I'll kind of ask Kate and Pete how quickly can we incorporate the feedback we got tonight and finalize the recommendations.
You know, so I think that you know, it's still early July. August sometimes can be difficult because of scheduling. So I'm available, and you know, and I think Pete and I, if we would have enough. Because you do your meetings are are they the first and second Thursdays?
So the Land Use Board meets first and second Thursdays. The Township Committee meets first and third Mondays.
Okay. So, you know, something.
Land Use Board, we can make the Township Committee accommodate the Land Use Board schedule.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that I think one thing that, as far as organization that we've discussed tonight, is we're going to make some changes that make it clear that while we have developed 3 scenarios, they're not standing alone. And I think that that's probably going to be the most substantive change that you'll see, even though they will still be there. Otherwise, just getting down to business and doing the report. So, Pete, do you have any thoughts on scheduling?
So you said the first, it's in the
Sounds
early
like-
part of
sounds-
the month, right?
That sounds like September, doesn't it?
September?
Yeah, I'm thinking
Yeah.
early September. So basically what
Mhm.
we would do is sort of a higher level, simpler version of what we gave today without a lot of the verbiage that was on the slide, just sort of a big picture of what the
Right.
scenarios, or we'd have a little bit more of the site analysis and what the next steps would be. Right?
Well, and the next, that would be once we've handed the project off. And we
Right.
will have a draft of the report for review prior to the meeting as well.
Yeah, I think if we shoot for September, that way we
Yes.
could give it to the board like a week or 2 in advance, so you have a chance to review it. So we're not coming in cold, you're not gonna come in cold to the meeting. You'll be able to we'll have a much more robust discussion. Not that this discussion hasn't been good, but you'll be able to say, I don't like this wording here. And we have those more substantial type of comments at the meeting, and then we can make those changes and move forward.
Yep.
So we meet the 1st and 2nd Thursdays in September. That's the 2nd or the 9th. So you want to make a target date for that?
Labor Day?
No.
No, because the 9th,
No?
the Labor Day is the
Oh, you're
6th.
right, you're right.
Everybody's
You're
late
right.
this year.
You're right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't do the 9th.
The
You can't do
9th?
the 9th? Okay, I probably can't do the 2nd.
Okay. All right, then let's target for the 9th. That's good.
Okay. Well,
Okay, that's a good target date.
okay. Pete, you're not available that night?
No, I mean, I'll
Oh,
be
you're not.
away. We could,
Okay. Well,
yeah, I don't necessarily know if I could probably fit it in. We don't want to go to October, right?
no.
All right, yeah, let's just shoot for the 9th and
Okay.
we'll figure out.
I
how to make it
might,
work, Yeah.
yeah, there's a potential my schedule might change for the 2nd too. So, which I would know I would probably know later, like that next week. So, because we don't, we don't have to state the date now. This is just organization, right? It's
No,
not-
just an idea to
Yeah.
target.
Right.
Okay.
So
Okay,
Labor Day
yeah.
is the 6th, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Labor
Yeah,
Day is
okay.
the 6th.
Yeah, okay, I could fit that in. That's
Okay.
it's
Great.
just the
Okay,
first
well,
thing
so
I
yeah,
figured.
we'll work. Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, this is
Yes,
Tom.
Yes,
I just have one cautionary note for Kate and Pete and
yes.
Walter. And that this is, I'm not sure where the 300 to 400,000 square feet of additional space comes from. And I imagine that may be possible, and maybe phase 2 included that much, and maybe phase 2, I kind of remember phase 2, so hopefully that came after what we have as an ordinance called the Resource Constraints Adjustment Formula Ordinance. But it's a nuance of the code that basically reduces floor area and coverage based upon the environmental constraints, wetlands, the high depth of water, shallow depth of water table, and other resource characteristics of property, steep slopes. And so if one were to try to do that calculation, you're supposed to apply those formulas to the acreage and its features. So that might be something to talk to Paul Ferrero and or Frank Banish about. And maybe if Ron Kennedy was involved in phase 2, to Ron, because I wouldn't want to give the misimpression when an ordinance doesn't allow that much square footage. I don't know either way, but it's not something you would see by looking at the zone chart. It's a site plan and subdivision regulatory provision. It happens to work very well for Bedminster, but I'm not saying it's a problem. I just think it's something to check out.
I agree with you, Tom, and I think that my recollection, which I wouldn't ask anybody to rely on, was that somewhere between 300 and 350,000 square feet was the approved unbuilt portion of the project that previously got, while those standards that Tom just referenced are in effect, which got approval for that additional floor area, which must have had to fit where Peter and Kate have told us you'd have to put something if you wanted to build it. And I'm pretty sure that's what they showed us. So we need to confirm whether or not that additional floor area is some entitlement at this point, which I think would be good for the property. And I think we did that in a very transparent and clear way when at the time the approval happened, but I think that might have been, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. So didn't happen yesterday. We can dig out the details of that for you. And I think you probably want that, but you know more or less what's possible. And part of what you're going to recommend to us, I would suspect, would be in order to energize our opportunity here, we might want to rethink some of the standards that might affect this property and other properties, of course, but we might not want to be a slave to the ordinance that says you couldn't do anything more here when we might want to be able to do more here. And within the confines, as Tom said, of the environmental envelope that we get to work within. But I agree, you've got great buffers because of the stream on one side, the boundary on, pretty much the highway, between the highway and the stream, we've pretty well defined what the limits of the site are. And I think that this is, I just commend everybody that's been involved in helping us get to here, because reformulating a vision for a site like this, which, it certainly doesn't rise to the level of an Aero Saarinen designed Homedale site, but by the same token, I'm not saying we should be trying to prevent these buildings from being torn down, but there is a certain element of their history on the site that might be more valuable than we've thought about before. And again, it's not Homedale, it's not the Bell site, but AT&T at this location is as iconic as they were at the other location. And the question really is, how do we build on that? I would think, because I've talked to the people in Somerset Development a few times, and they've been extremely forthcoming with everything they know about what we might want to do. I would think if we talk to Ralph, the manager of the company, about how he's done what he's done there, we might get a couple of tips. But I think the consultants have us on the right track right now. And the real question is, can we zero in enough on what we want to accomplish by virtue of the vision for the future without cutting off opportunities that might be really good opportunities here? So it's, be selective, but don't be so selective. My mother used to always tell me, don't be so open-minded, your brains fall out. And I think what we're really talking about here is finding the best fit for a site that has been extremely valuable. If you look at the OR zones in Somerset County, this is an iconic example of why we thought that these low intensity zones were such a great thing, and they produced great ratables for a very long time. But we've also pointed out to you in our last reexamination that the best value of this site has declined so dramatically that we really do need to think about what we're going to do here. So I think we're on the right track. Thanks for listening to me. I really appreciate the consultants bringing all this forward. And I think the board has done a great job of offering some feedback. So I'll shut up and let everybody else talk.
Thanks, Frank. Yes. Okay. Thank you, Walter, Kate, and Peter. Thank you very much for your presentation and your work. So I'll say good night, I guess, for tonight, and we'll see you in September.
Okay, thank you all again. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much.
We'll see you.
Thank
We're,
you.
we're getting towards the end. We'll see you soon.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
And that's what we're here for the county for, is to help with these types of things. So thank you for partnering with us on this. We're very excited to help the township.
Well, wait a minute, Walter, are you saying you're from the government? You're here to help?
I know, isn't that the serious words of the English language?
You can't trust that face. Have a good night, everybody.
You're doing a great job. Thank you.
Take care.
Good night.
Good night,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, I'll open it up to the board. Does anyone from the board have anything that they would like to talk about or discuss?
So it's Larry, I'll go through some quick comments. And I do want to reiterate something that Walt mentioned, and it's something that you've all heard me mention from the very beginning that we started this process. I've mentioned it here at the planning board. I've mentioned it at the township committee, which is we as the township committee and the land use board and me personally, we are in no way looking to push AT&T out. In fact, the preference is that AT&T stays in the property and that AT&T actually grows in that property. And that's been something I've conveyed directly to AT&T and to the folks at MetLife and to everyone on this planning study. So, Walt mentioned that, and I do want to say that that's our preference, right? AT&T has been a great resident here in Bedminster, employs a lot of the folks in town and our surrounding communities. But if we don't have a plan, we'll be left where Reddington was when Mark left, and they didn't have a plan. Or frankly, in Homedale. What we see at Homedale didn't happen overnight. That was years and years and years dealing with a vacant building and disputes between Somerset Development as the respective purchaser, the Homedale Township Committee, and the Planning Board. So what we are doing is being proactive and anticipating, watching what AT&T is doing elsewhere across the country, and certainly keeping an eye on AT&T as they make their own corporate moves. So once again, the preference is AT&T stays there, but we need to have a plan, and that's why we're doing this. The second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just have a question. It seems to me that realistically, the market to a large extent is going to drive whatever happens. The market, the money will drive more so than whatever, all the efforts we do. Not that we shouldn't undertake the efforts, but that the market and the money will control. If that's right, then to me, the issue is, what is it, if anything, that we can do outside the four corners of this property to make the property itself more desirable? And the answer might be nothing, but the answer might be that there are other things we can do which would make the area more attractive. And I understand, we have a nice park system, we have good schools, and I know we're not going to radically change the whole community, but it would seem to me that it's hard to do anything and it's hard to move the ship, but we almost have a better chance if we could figure out something to make the property more attractive than we do by trying to dictate what the market will do.
So on that issue, one thing, and I know this was touched upon earlier, is if we just let the market drive, this would be 194 acres of multifamily with probably about another 3,000 residents thrown into that property. So so we're not going there.
Right.
But in the earliest conversations that I had with Walter, when the county first presented their priority growth investment area study, which was the earliest genesis of where we are today, was, okay, got the AT&T campus. We also have Somerville Road, Bedminster Village, 206, the advanced buildings over between 202 and 206, as well as looking at what's going on in Far Hills and further down in Pluckerman. So in very early conversations I had with AT&T is there anything else that, you all want to see in town? Same with MetLife. Do we need more pizzerias? Another nail salon? Because we can bring those in.
Right. exactly.
Market will drive that. Are there any other elements, not just on the site itself, but that would lead to supporting businesses and supporting opportunities on the AT&T campus? And to some extent, one of the things that we've heard from industry experts and from others as well is, and Frank Banish has been lecturing us for a while about this, which is where we are deficient is we don't have dedicated rental. And whether this was just the market speaking, but with the Elite project on Lamington, 30 units of apartments, and with the rezoning of the KRE site, apartments, it sort of starts filling in some of those gaps that we haven't seen. And also with the rezoning of the KRE site with the residential, that sort of mixed use, the more traditional mixed use, it begins to develop a more sense of place. And even Pluckerman, we can see what's happening in Pluckerman right now.
Right.
That for years, frankly, and Colin has heard me say this, Pluckerman needed a kick in the ass.
Right.
I usually say pants, but in this tonight, I'm going to say it. And I think we're actually beginning to see that. We're seeing some investment coming into Pluckerman that we haven't seen in the past. Bedminster is not going to become Morristown. We're not going to be Summit, right? That's just not us. But can we work around the edges on expanding opportunities, expanding uses that will then support the businesses? Yes.
If it stays straight office. It's not going to become Morristown or Summit, and we don't aspire to that necessarily. But if it's going to stay straight office, that's what it's competing with, and it'll lose every time. It will lose, right? It will lose every time. So if we are expanding,
Richard, hold on one second. You said if we try to just be straight office, we will lose every time. Is that your point?
That's my point.
Yes.
Okay, that's a huge point, because I think part of what we're talking about here is going to try to rely on reinvigorating a lot of that office space so it doesn't go away. And I agree with the mayor that if we can keep them, we should. But you are an owner of other empty office buildings, so you are acutely aware of what might happen here. Do you have some other thoughts about that, Rich?
so so that's where I'm going. So I think the zoning adaptability that they talked about in the presentation and be able to expand the uses on the site beyond office, manufacturing, a certain amount of manufacturing, a certain amount of I don't know. When we talk, all those opportunities that I see a solution in. It's going to take a dynamic developer with a vision, or perhaps a requirement in tow, more likely. Right. It's not going to be, the field of dreams where if you build it, they will come. It's always in New Jersey, if you come, I'll build it.
True. Very true.
So I think just creating some energy into Walt's point, right? Steve. To Steve's point, allowing to create a market is what's going to be necessary here. Not becoming a victim of the market, as Larry's suggesting, where, some developers say, oh, it's 194 acres, 30 units per acre, and we'll have 700, apartments there. Not anything anybody wants either, I don't think. So, this creativity that we've started to, that we've spent some time now trying to identify or outline, the parameters of what the options are, I think is great. But I think, we're not going to salvage, as I said before too, if you're going to try to do 900,000 square feet, 20,000 square feet at a time, it'll take years. And that's a good size requirement these days, 20,000 square feet.
Oh, Lord, yeah. Think about 5,000.
That's a good size requirement. So if we end up with the NOC and we reimagine the GNOC and we reimagine the other 600,000 square feet on the site as mixed uses, variable uses, I think there's something there, but if we think that we're still going to have 900,000 square feet of office space and lease it anytime soon, I'm here to tell you no.
Yeah, and I don't see that at all in the study or the recommendations.
To build on Rich's point, if we give the market the parameters of what we're willing to accept, it makes a potential investment in Bedminster a much easier decision for a developer, right? If we're very clear about what we want and what we will say yes to and what we're looking for and what we don't, we're not going to get the developer that wants to come in and build,
Conversations with that.
couple hundred units.
Or somebody who's going to come along, Anna, like you're suggesting, someone's going to come along and try to take advantage of our desperation and come in here with looking for a variance for something obnoxious that, 5 years hence, without a plan, we might be forced to listen to.
Yep.
Self-storage.
I think Rich, you're always forced to listen. Rich, it's Tom. You're always forced to listen, but you're not always forced to approve.
Right.
Understood.
Right.
I think what we've heard tonight, if I can just try to summarize a little bit, was that the suggestion about selecting the types of uses that might allow us to expand what we thought of as manufacturing to include those uses. With the right list of uses, we could be hopefully self-selecting the users that would be the next cluster we're trying to be part of. The risk we run is if the list is too tight, we don't get anybody. And the other risk is if the list is too loose, we get all kinds of stuff we didn't really want. So I think the county's this consultant team has given us a great step in the right direction. I think they knew from the beginning that their job was to hand this off to us and for us to take it the rest of the distance. So I think the next part of this will be, we'll listen to them come in with their final report and we'll get a chance to weigh in on that. And then we're going to be looking at a master plan amendment and some rezoning that will really stake our claim for what's going to happen at the AT&T site. And I think it's great that we're here because we should be here. This is one of the most important things. We lost more tax rateable from the reduction in value in this site than any other site in town. So it's a big deal.
Good point.
So as I continue with my board member comments,
I'm sorry, Mayor, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Okay. I'll get you back, Frank. Don't worry.
I'm sure you will.
I wasn't at our new members' first meeting where Steve, you participated by Zoom, right? That was it. So let me formally introduce Stephen first to the land use board. Stephen is a resident on Cedar Ridge Road. He is an attorney. He is a lifelong Somerset County resident, extremely active at the county. He's been on the Parks Commission for years and is an attorney. And Stephen, if there's anything you want to say, I'm just going to say welcome and glad to have you. You're a smart, wise voice on this committee, and we need some of that here.
One more thing, I'd like to.
And that's why you think next to the
That's why I just like a note for my wife. Reading all those things. No, thank you.
Thank you, Steve, and welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll all meet in September, because when we have all meetings, that no more Zoom, we'll be all together once again. Anybody else on the board? Mayor, you finished?
I'm done.
Good. Okay.
Good. Is that what
Good.
you said? Good, right?
Good. I got that.
I want to go back to my vacation. Come on.
Yeah, really.
We have no applications currently in the, we've got quite a few in the pipeline, but we don't have any of them scheduled. So stay tuned. We'll find out if we have any August meetings, but right now we have nothing scheduled. So we'll may have some more vacation time. But that's it. We'll have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Hold on one second, please.
Yes, Frank?
Are you already at the beach
I am
chair
at
for?
the beach.
Okay,
I
good.
am at the beach.
I was hoping you weren't gonna have to drive there tonight. That's great. Thank you.
No.
All righty.
No, it's very bad weather, actually. It's started to rain and it's gonna start soon, so I'm
Yeah.
afraid I'm gonna lose my electric like I did last week, so we'll see what happens.
Aye.
You know, I'm not going to be done. I'm not going to be done. I do have one other comment.
Oh, my
Okay,
God.
Mayor.
Sarah Hausman was serving as the board secretary tonight, was operating and handling Zoom. And Sarah, you did a great job. Thank you
Yes,
very
Thank you,
much.
Sarah. Yes. Yes, thank you, Mayor, for saying that. Yes,
Yeah, thank you,
Okay.
Sarah.
yes. All right, I will say goodnight and have a good
Motion to
month.
adjourn?
We did have a motion.
Oh, it's already passed? Sorry, I missed
It
it.
already passed, right?
I will shut up then, sorry.
It's okay. Good night, everybody. Enjoy.
night.
Good night.
Good night.
Sorry, you need to hit stop for some.